What if the very thing you thought was delayed was actually being prepared to arrive bigger than you imagined? What if God has been working behind the silence, and what's coming next will leave you saying, "I never expected this"? There are moments in life when it feels like your prayers are unanswered, your efforts unnoticed, and your faith stretched to its limit. You did what you knew to do. You prayed, you believed, you waited, yet nothing seemed to change. But hear this carefully. Delay is not denial, and silence is not absence. Many people stop believing just before God moves in a way that exceeds everything they expected. This message is not for everyone. It is for those who have been faithful in small things, consistent in prayer, and patient in seasons of uncertainty. It is for those who feel like they have reached the end of their strength and are wondering if God still remembers their name. If you stay with this message until the end, you will understand why your expectations were limited, how God works beyond human logic, and what you must do to prepare your heart for what is coming next, because what God is about to do will not fit into your old mindset. God has never been limited by human limits, and He has never operated according to human expectations. From the beginning of time, God has worked in ways that confuse the natural mind because His ways are higher than human reasoning. When people calculate outcomes based on logic, resources, and timing, God looks at faith, obedience, and trust. Many people struggle, not because God is unwilling to bless them, but because they are measuring God by what they have seen before. They expect God to repeat what He has already done, but God is always moving towards something greater. When you look back at your life, you will notice that the moments when God moved most powerfully were the moments when you felt the most helpless, when there were no connections left, no strength remaining, no clear path forward. Those were the moments when God revealed His power. Human limits are the starting point for divine intervention. God allows you to reach the end of your understanding so that you can step into the beginning of His wisdom. As long as you rely on what you can control, you will only experience what you can manage. But when you surrender control, you open the door for God to exceed what you thought was possible. Many people pray with small expectations because they are afraid of disappointment. They have been hurt before, they have waited before, they have believed before, and when things did not turn out the way they imagined, they lowered their expectations to protect their hearts. But God does not respond to fear-based faith. He responds to trust that believes He is good, even when the outcome is unknown. God is not offended by your big expectations. He is limited only by unbelief, not by bold faith. Throughout Scripture and throughout life, God consistently chooses impossible situations to demonstrate His glory. He chooses barren ground to bring forth fruit. He chooses weakness to reveal strength. He chooses lack to show abundance. This is because God wants you to know that what He gives you did not come from your own effort, intelligence, or strength. When God exceeds your expectations, it leaves no room for pride, only gratitude. You cannot explain it away. You cannot take credit for it. You can only testify that God did what no one else could do. Human expectations are often shaped by past experiences, but God is not bound by your past. You may have failed before, but God is not measuring your future by your failures. You may have missed opportunities, but God is not limited by missed chances. He is the God of restoration, multiplication, and new beginnings. When God decides to move, He does not simply bring you back to where you were. He takes you beyond where you have ever been. That is why His blessings often look unfamiliar at first. They do not fit into your old mindset. Sometimes God delays because your expectations are too small. If He answered immediately, you would settle for less than what He intended. So He stretches your faith. He challenges your thinking. He allows the situation to grow so that when the breakthrough comes, it matches the size of the promise, not the size of your fear. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater than you imagined. People often say they trust God, but their expectations reveal otherwise. They pray for change but prepare for disappointment. They ask for growth but plan for survival. God is inviting you to lift your expectations beyond what you can see. Not because you deserve it, not because you earned it, but because He is faithful to His word. Faith is not denying reality. Faith is believing that God is greater than your reality. When God works beyond human limits, He also transforms the way you think. You begin to realize that God is not a backup plan. He is not a last option. He is the source. And when you align your faith with His nature, you stop asking whether God can do it and start asking whether you are ready to receive it. Readiness is not about perfection. It is about openness. It is about allowing God to surprise you. Many people miss divine opportunities because they expect God to work in familiar ways. They expect the same pattern, the same timing, the same method. But God often chooses unexpected paths so that your faith remains alive. If you could predict every move of God, you would stop depending on Him. That is why exceeding expectations is part of His design. He wants to stretch your capacity to believe so that your future can hold what He wants to release. When God exceeds your expectations, it is not just to bless you, but to change you. It shifts your mindset from scarcity to abundance, from fear to trust, from control to surrender. It teaches you that God is not limited by what you see, what you feel, or what others say. He is only limited by whether you are willing to believe that He can do more. Your limits are real, but they are not final. God is not waiting for you to become stronger. He is waiting for you to trust Him more. When you step beyond your own understanding and place your confidence in Him, you will discover that what God has prepared is far greater than what you expected, far deeper than what you imagined, far more powerful than what you planned. Waiting is one of the most misunderstood seasons in a believer's life. People assume that if God has not answered yet, something must be wrong. They question their faith, their prayers, and even their worth. But waiting is not evidence of God's displeasure. It is often proof that God is working on something too important to rush. When God delays, it is not because He is unwilling, but because He is intentional. He sees what you cannot see, and He understands what you are not yet ready to handle. In the waiting season, God is doing two works at the same time. One is visible, and the other is invisible. The visible work is what you notice most. The closed doors, the unanswered prayers, the slow progress, the silence. But the invisible work is where the true preparation happens. God is shaping your character, strengthening your faith, and aligning your heart with His will. If God answered every prayer the moment it was prayed, many people would receive blessings they are not spiritually prepared to sustain. Preparation is rarely comfortable. It requires patience, humility, and trust. In waiting, God exposes the motives of the heart. Are you trusting God only for what He can give, or are you trusting Him for who He is? Waiting reveals whether your faith is dependent on results or rooted in relationship. This is why God often uses time as a tool. Time has a way of removing pride, self-reliance, and false confidence, leaving behind a faith that depends fully on Him. Many people think waiting means doing nothing, but spiritual waiting is active. It is a season of deepening prayer, refining obedience, and quiet endurance. While nothing seems to be changing on the outside, everything is changing on the inside. God is building endurance so that when the blessing comes, it will not overwhelm you. Some blessings require emotional maturity, spiritual depth, and disciplined faith. Without preparation, what you prayed for could actually harm you. God's timing is connected to purpose, not comfort. He is not trying to make life easy, but meaningful. That is why He does not rush the process. What you are becoming is just as important as what you are receiving. If God released the promise before the process was complete, the blessing would arrive early but incomplete. God never releases something unfinished. When He moves with precision. Waiting also teaches you how to trust God without evidence. Faith that depends on signs is weak faith, but faith that survives waiting becomes strong and unshakable. In the waiting season, God teaches you to hear His voice without external confirmation. He trains you to walk by faith and not by sight. This kind of faith does not panic when progress is slow because it knows that God is faithful even in silence. Many believers confuse preparation with punishment. They assume the delay is correction rather than development. But God does not prepare what He plans to destroy. If God is taking time with you, it is because what He has planned carries weight. He prepares deeply for things that will last long. Quick blessings often fade quickly, but prepared blessings carry endurance. In waiting, God also realigns your desires. Sometimes what you initially prayed for was incomplete or misdirected. As you wait, God refines your prayer. What once mattered deeply may begin to lose its hold, and what truly matters begins to rise. This alignment is necessary because God does not just want to bless you, He wants the blessing to bless you back. If your desires are misaligned, even answered prayers can lead to frustration. The waiting season exposes what you trust when nothing is happening. Do you trust your emotions, your circumstances, or God's promises? Many people walk away in waiting because they interpret silence as rejection. But silence is often instruction. God is teaching you to rest, to listen, and to trust His nature rather than your feelings. Feelings change quickly, but God's faithfulness remains constant. Waiting also separates those who are serious about faith from those who are casual. Anyone can believe when prayers are answered quickly, but those who remain faithful in waiting develop spiritual resilience. This resilience becomes the foundation for future growth. When the blessing finally comes, it will require strength to manage it. God knows that sudden increase without preparation leads to collapse. In the waiting season, God is often protecting you from premature exposure. If He revealed everything too early, the pressure would be too great. Waiting shields you while you grow. It allows roots to grow deep before the branches become visible. Deep roots are not impressive to the eye, but they determine how high and strong something can grow. Many people are closer to their breakthrough than they realize, but the final stage of waiting feels the hardest. This is because the preparation is almost complete. Resistance often increases just before release. The waiting becomes heavier, not because God is far, but because the moment is near. God strengthens you in this stage so that when the door opens, you can walk through it with confidence rather than fear. Waiting teaches you that God's faithfulness is not dependent on speed. He is just as faithful in slow seasons as in sudden ones. The same God who answers quickly also works patiently. When you understand this, waiting no longer feels like abandonment. It becomes a sacred space where trust is formed, strength is built, and faith is refined, where you begin to sense that something greater is being prepared, something that requires this season, something that cannot arrive until you are ready to carry it, something that will make sense only after the waiting has completed its work and your heart has learned to rest in God, even when nothing seems to be moving, and you continue to stand believing, knowing that preparation is happening even now, while you wait and trust and remain faithful without seeing the full picture. Yet, expectation is not a passive feeling. It is an active posture of faith. It is the inner alignment that says God is able, God is willing, and God is working even when nothing visible confirms it. Expectation prepares the heart to receive what God desires to release. Without expectation, even the greatest miracles can pass unnoticed. Many people pray faithfully but expect cautiously, guarding themselves against disappointment, not realizing that guarded expectations restrict spiritual reception. God responds to expectation because expectation honors His nature. When you expect God to move, you are declaring trust in who He is rather than what you see. Expectation speaks before evidence appears. It is faith choosing agreement with God's promises over agreement with circumstances. When God sees expectation, He sees readiness, not perfection, not strength, but openness. A heart that expects God to move creates space for divine activity. Throughout life, expectation shapes outcomes. People who expect failure often prepare for it unconsciously. They speak in cautious tones, make small plans, and settle into survival mode. But when expectation shifts, behavior shifts. Prayer becomes bold, worship becomes deeper, obedience becomes joyful. Expectation changes how you wait, how you speak, and how you respond to resistance. God honors this alignment because it reflects trust rather than fear. Many miracles in life are not missed because God withheld them, but because expectation was absent. God may be ready to heal, restore, open doors, and release provision, but the heart must be positioned to receive. Expectation is the doorway through which miracles enter. It is not demanding God to act, it is believing that He can act. This belief creates spiritual sensitivity. You begin to recognize opportunities, confirmations, and movements that others overlook. Low expectation often comes from disappointment. When prayers take time or outcomes differ from hopes, people lower their expectations to protect themselves. But God never asked His people to lower expectation. He asked them to raise trust. Expectation does not mean controlling the outcome. It means trusting God with the outcome. When you expect God to move, you are not dictating how He should act, but affirming that His action will be good. Expectation also determines capacity. A small container cannot hold a great outpouring. God does not change in measure, but people do. As expectation increases, capacity increases. Faith stretches the inner space where God's blessings are poured. When expectation is small, even large blessings feel overwhelming or confusing. When expectation is strong, blessings feel aligned and purposeful. God often challenges people to expect beyond logic. Logic relies on patterns and probability, but expectation relies on promise. Logic says prepare for what is likely. Expectation says prepare for what God has spoken. This is why expectation feels risky. It requires trust without guarantee. But faith has never been about guarantees. It has always been about relationship. Expectation grows when relationship deepens. Expectation also affects how you interpret delays. Without expectation, delays feel like rejection. With expectation, delays feel like preparation. The same situation can produce discouragement or confidence depending on expectation. When expectation is alive, waiting does not weaken faith. It strengthens it. You begin to interpret silence not as absence but as anticipation. God often increases expectation before releasing breakthrough. He stirs hope, renews vision, and awakens desire. This is not emotional excitement. It is spiritual readiness. Expectation begins to rise quietly, sometimes unexpectedly. You find yourself believing again after a long season of doubt. You feel drawn to pray again, to hope again, to plan again. This stirring is not accidental. It is God preparing you to receive. Expectation also governs endurance. People who expect God to move do not quit easily. They remain consistent, not because circumstances are favorable, but because trust is anchored. Expectation gives strength to persist. It fuels obedience when results are not immediate. It keeps the heart engaged rather than withdrawn. When expectation aligns with humility, it becomes powerful. True expectation is not entitlement, it is dependence. It acknowledges that God owes nothing but gives generously. This kind of expectation does not demand, it receives. It waits with confidence, not anxiety. It anticipates goodness without controlling timing. God desires His people to live with expectancy, not anxiety. Anxiety worries about what might go wrong. Expectation anticipates what God might do. One drains energy, the other renews it. When expectation replaces anxiety, peace follows. You begin to rest even while waiting. This rest does not come from certainty of outcome, but from certainty of God's character. Expectation also transforms how blessings are handled. Those who expect God to move receive with gratitude rather than shock. They steward blessings with wisdom rather than fear. Expectation prepares the heart not only to receive, but to manage what comes next. God looks for people who can carry increase without losing humility. When expectation becomes consistent, faith matures. You no longer need constant reassurance. You trust God even when outcomes change. Expectation becomes a lifestyle rather than a reaction. You begin each day open to God's movement, aware that His ways may exceed your plans. God delights in exceeding expectations because it reveals His glory. When He moves beyond what was imagined, it reminds people that He is not limited by human understanding. Exceeded expectations create testimony. They strengthen faith not only in the receiver, but in those who witness the result. Expectation does not force God's hand, but it aligns the heart with His will. When expectation is present, faith remains active, hope remains alive, and readiness remains constant. God responds to this posture because it reflects trust, humility, and openness. When you live with expectation, you are not waiting passively, you are preparing actively, you speak differently, you pray differently, you live differently. As expectation rises, fear loses influence. Fear focuses on loss. Expectation focuses on promise. One shrinks vision, the other expands it. When expectation governs the heart, faith becomes resilient. You stop asking whether God will move and begin preparing for how to walk forward when He does. Expectation creates momentum before movement appears. It trains the heart to recognize opportunity and respond with courage. Expectation does not guarantee ease, but it guarantees engagement. You remain involved in the process rather than detached. God works most powerfully in hearts that are engaged. Expectation keeps the heart open, the spirit alert, and the faith active. It allows God to work freely without resistance. When expectation is alive, miracles are no longer distant possibilities but approaching realities, stirring quietly within the soul, preparing the heart to recognize the moment when God moves beyond what was imagined and steps into what was hoped for, awakening faith once again as trust deepens and readiness increases and the heart remains open, believing that what is coming will be greater than what has been seen so far, and that God is already at work even now beyond understanding, beyond logic, beyond limits. As expectation continues to rise and faith continues to stretch and the spirit remains attentive, waiting with confidence and trust, ready to receive what God is about to release.